Okay, so today we're going to review the test that you took on Friday. We're going to start with problem number 1. In an experiment, various objects are suspended from the ceiling by a spring. There turns out to be a linear relationship between the length S, this is important, we're defining our variable, of the spring and the weight W, that's also important, of the object. The relationship is given by the equation where S is measured in centimeters and W in grams. Use the equation and find the length of the string when a 150-gram object is suspended. So I start by writing my equation. S equals 0.05 W plus 14. And I'm trying to figure out the length. The length is S, because that's what I underlined up here. When I suspend a 150-gram object, which is weight, W stands for weight, from this string. So I'm going to plug in 150 for W, and then I'm going to use my calculator to figure out this calculation. I have 0.05 when my calculator decides to turn on. I have 0.05 times 150 plus 14 is going to give me 21.5. My answer here is 21.5, which is D. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. Tracy wants to use an expression that will give her an odd integer. Which expression should she use? And so there's different ways that I can approach this problem. Some of you guys feel comfortable enough to do this problem the long way, which is basically you start with each answer choice. You create a table for each one, x and y. You start by picking random x values, like 1, 2, and 3. And then you would begin by plugging in those numbers for the x, substituting. And so if I plug in 2 to this rule, I end up with 11. If I plug in 3 for x, I would end up with 16. And right away I can see that because I'm looking for an expression that will produce odd integers, and this one is obviously already giving me 2 even numbers, 2 even integers, that F is not my answer. The other way that you can do this is instead of you doing the work, you can just put your answer choices into y equals. I'm going to put answer choice G, which is 4x plus 1, into my calculator. Second graph, and right away I can see that regardless of what number I put in, I can put in any negative number. All of my y's, all of my outputs are odd, and I can put any positive number in, and I will still have odd numbers come out as outcomes. So my answer right away has to be G, because this will produce nothing but odd integers. Okay, I'm going to go to problem number 3. The first 4 numbers in a pattern are shown below: 5 halves, 10, 45 halves, 40, etc. If the pattern continues, which expressions can be used to find the nth number in the pattern? So I'm going to begin by first drawing myself a table. In this problem, I'm going to have 4 n's because I have 4 different numbers. My first number is 5 halves. My second number is 10. My third number is 45 halves. And my fourth number is 40. I'm going to convert my fractions into decimals because in my calculator, my table gives me only nothing but numbers with decimals. So I'm going to start by plugging in my answer choices into y equals, simply because I do not want to spend too much time making tables. And I'm going to put in 2.5 x squared. Remember, my calculator doesn't like n's. So instead of an n, I'm going to plug in an x. I'm going to do second graph. And if I plug in 1, I should get out 2.5, which I do. If I plug in 2, I should get out 10, and I do. If I plug in 3, I should get out 22.5, and I do. If I plug in 4, I should get out 40, and I do. So my table, the table produced by answer choice A matches the table that I should have, therefore my answer is A. Let's look at number 4. What is the domain of the graph relation? Remember, x and y went to the doctor. For my domain, I'm looking at my x values. And I see that to create this point down here, and this point right here, I had to use -4 on the x-axis. Remember, this is the x-axis, which goes side to side. To create this point right here, I had to use -3. To create this point right here, I had to use -2 on the x-axis. To create this point up here, I had to use -1 on the x-axis. And to create this point all the way up here, I had to use 0 on the x-axis. So my answer is F. Number 5. What is the range of the following graph? I'm looking at range, and if I think back to what we talked about in class, x and y went to the doctor. When I look at range, I'm looking at the y values, which means I'm looking at my y-axis, which goes up and down. I'm going to first begin by drawing myself a box. And before I draw my box, I have to exaggerate these arrows. And I'm just going to draw a box. If I start going down, I'm not going to have a bottom on this box because I have an arrow that's pointing down. That means that this line is going to continue on forever and ever down. If I start going up, if I start getting my graph up, my box up, I'm really not going to be able to stop anywhere because I have an arrow that's pointing up as well. It means that this graph is going to keep on going forever and ever up. And if I try to draw a side on the right, because I have arrows pointing to the right, which means that this graph is going to keep on going to the right, I'm not going to have a right side either. I only have a left side. So I'm looking at the range, which means I'm looking at the top and the bottom of my graph, of my box, and I don't have a top, which means this is going to positive infinity. I don't have a bottom, which means this is going to negative infinity. And so I have my range is going from negative infinity, positive infinity, a line in the middle, less than. And really what this is saying is my graph is always going to keep on going up because I have an arrow pointing up, and it's always going to keep going down because I have an arrow pointing down. Really this says I'm using all the y values to create this picture, this graph. So this is the same, instead of saying from negative infinity to positive infinity, we simply just say all real numbers, using all of the y's. That's why you don't have a top and a bottom. So my answer is A. Let me go down to number 6. What is the range of the following graph? Now again, the very first thing I'm going to start doing is exaggerate these lines, these arrows. Right away, I can already tell because I have arrows pointing up. I'm not going to have a top on my box. Because I have an arrow pointing to the right, I'm not going to have a right side. And because this arrow is pointing to the left, I'm not going to have a left side. But because I have no arrows pointing down, I do have a bottom. I'm looking at the range, which if you remember from class, X and Y went to the doctor. When I'm looking at the range, I'm looking at my Y value. So for range, I'm looking at the Y-axis. My Y-axis goes up and down, so I'm going to focus on the bottom and the top of my box. The bottom of my box is at -4, and I don't have a top. That means I'm going to positive infinity. So I'm going from -4 to positive infinity. I have a Y in the middle, and I have less than. Am I using the -4? Yes. And really, on my answer choices, all I really have to do is cover up this infinity part because I don't really use it. I need to know what it means, but I don't need to use it. And if you read this, this is saying y is either -4 or any number that's bigger. And if we look at our picture, we're using -4 and everything that's bigger than -4, which makes sense. We're not really using anything below -4. We don't have a picture below that. So our answer should be G. Let's see if we can do one more. Well, actually, this is where I'm going to start, where I'm going to stop part 1. Make sure you watch part 2 of this test. And if you did not score well the first time that you took this test, then be ready to take the redo, which is available in Schoology.